At 2:40 a.m., on a pitch-black June night in 1944, an 18-year-old U.S. Marine stands alone on the cliffs of Saipan. No squad beside him, no officer watching, no plan written in any manual. Just a carbine slung across his chest, a flashlight wrapped in cloth to hide its glow, and a voice that sounds disturbingly close to the enemy's own language. Below him, hidden inside the volcanic cliffs, hundreds of Japanese soldiers and terrified civilians crowd into cave networks. They have been told that Americans will torture them, that surrender is worse than death, and that the honorable path is suicide. On other islands in the Pacific, almost no one has given up alive. Saipan is expected to be the same. The young Marine draws a slow breath and shouts in flawless Japanese, the language of the people hiding beneath the cliffs. You are surrounded. If you come out, you will be safe. If you remain inside, everyone here will die. The wind and the surf swallow his words, and for a long moment, nothing answers him. Then, somewhere in the darkness, a single baby begins to cry. The sound echoes faintly through the rock tunnels, and in that fragile moment, the Marine Guy Gabaldon realizes that someone out there is listening. Someone is choosing between death and the voice of a stranger. 2 decades earlier, no one would have predicted that a runaway kid from East Los Angeles would one day stand on a battlefield speaking to enemy soldiers in their own tongue. Born into a poor Mexican-American family, Guy grows up fighting to survive, shining shoes on Skid Row to bring home a few coins for his parents. At 10 years old, he is already running in the wrong direction, mixed up with a street gang, skipping school, drifting toward trouble. But fate intervenes in an unexpected way when he befriends the Nakano family, Japanese Americans who live nearby and treat him as if he were their own son. By 12, Guy moves into the Nakano household. He eats at their table, goes to their church, sleeps under their roof, and attends Japanese language school every afternoon. He learns honorifics, children's songs, family customs, and the subtle phrases that only native speakers use. Before long, he speaks Japanese with the natural rhythm of a local. He becomes, as he later says, half Mexican, half Japanese, all American. But on December 7th, 1941, everything shatters. Pearl Harbor is attacked. Overnight, people who raised Guy like family are labeled potential enemies. Soldiers arrive, buses line the streets, and the Nakano family is taken away to an internment camp. Guy watches them leave through the bus windows, faces he loves pressed behind the glass, heading toward a camp in Wyoming surrounded by barbed wire. He feels anger at the United States for imprisoning innocent families, and anger at Imperial Japan for causing a world where such fears can thrive. At 17, determined to prove his loyalty, he enlists in the U.S. Marine Corps. His Japanese-American family is still behind barbed wire, but he chooses to fight for a country that has wronged them, believing that the only way to honor them is to serve. In 1944, Gabaldon lands on Saipan with the 2nd Marine Division. The island is a fortress because if the Americans take it, their long-range bombers will finally be able to reach the Japanese home islands. Tokyo knows that losing Saipan means losing the war. They plan to fight to the last breath. The Japanese defenders receive a brutal order: kill 7 Americans for every Japanese soldier lost. Surrender is forbidden. On earlier islands, like Tarawa, fewer than 100 prisoners were taken from thousands of defenders. Almost all died fighting or by suicide. Saipan will be no different. The Marines hit the beaches under a storm of artillery and machine gun fire. The reef stalls the landing craft, forcing Marines to wade ashore under direct fire. Dead and wounded float in the surf, and the black volcanic sand turns dark red before noon. Gabaldon's official assignment is modest: scout, interpreter, translator. He is supposed to stay behind the line, interpret captured documents, and question whatever rare prisoner might be taken alive. But war doesn't care about job descriptions. On day 1, he is fighting like everyone else. That night, after the first brutal hours of combat, Gabaldon sits on an ammunition crate, staring into the darkness. He has seen Japanese soldiers executed by their own officers for attempting to surrender. He has heard civilians screaming from inside the caves. He knows what will happen when the Marines push north. He also knows something no one else in the division fully understands. The voices echoing from the caves sound like the families he grew up with. Their accents, their rhythms, the frightened tone of mothers calming children. They are strangers, but they feel familiar. He realizes two truths. Almost no one will surrender, and the Marines will suffer heavy casualties if those caves turn into choke points. But Guy Gabaldon speaks the enemy's language as fluently as his own. That single gift could save lives, American and Japanese alike, if he has the courage to use it. On the second night, while his unit sleeps, Gabaldon makes a decision that defies every Marine Corps rule. He slips away from camp with his rifle, his knife, and a pouch of rations. No backup, no approval, no plan beyond instinct. He heads directly toward the dark cliffs marked on maps as enemy territory. He moves silently across the rocks, listening to every sound. A clatter of metal from a tunnel entrance, a whispered argument, the heavy breathing of exhausted soldiers hiding underground. He creeps closer, far closer than is sane, until he can smell the smoke from their cooking fires. Then he stands, takes cover behind a boulder, and shouts in perfect Japanese, "Come out. You are surrounded. If you surrender, I will guarantee your safety. If you remain inside, you will not survive the night." His voice carries across the cliffs, and for the first time in the Pacific War, someone answers him. From the darkness inside the cliff, a voice finally answers him, shaky, suspicious, confused. Gabaldon keeps speaking, softening his tone, shifting between military command and gentle reassurance. He talks about safety, food, water, and honor. He tells them he will personally guarantee their protection. Then, through the shadowed entrance, 3 Japanese soldiers emerge, rifles lowered, hands trembling in the cold night air. Gabaldon escorts the prisoners back to Marine lines as dawn paints the sky orange. When he arrives, stunned officers surround him, demanding answers. One major stares at the 3 prisoners, trying to understand how a single Marine brought them in alive when entire companies failed to capture even one. The officers call him reckless, accuse him of endangering the battalion, and threaten to court-martial him on the spot. But as the sun rises higher, something becomes clear. These 3 prisoners are the first breakthrough on an island where surrender is almost unheard of. Gabaldon tries to explain he knows the culture, he knows the language, he understands the fear in those caves better than any textbook. The officers don't know whether to believe him, but they can't ignore the results. That night, despite every warning, Gabaldon disobeys orders again. He slips out of camp with nothing but a canteen, his M1 carbine, and the stubborn belief that he can save lives on both sides. The cliffs glow faintly under the moon, and he moves faster now. He knows the terrain, he knows where the voices come from, and he knows they are waiting. This time, he approaches a larger cave system. The air is thick with smoke and whispers. Children cry softly. Men argue in low, urgent tones. A Japanese officer shouts for silence. Gabaldon positions himself behind a fallen rock formation and begins speaking again, calm, confident, authoritative. He tells them they are surrounded by battalions, that artillery is ready to fire. He uses fear and hope in the same breath. Hours pass slowly. Then, like shadows stretching out of the earth, dozens of people begin stepping into the moonlight, women holding infants, elderly men limping on makeshift canes, soldiers supporting wounded comrades. Gabaldon cannot believe the sight unfolding before him. He counts them one by one, guiding them along the ridge toward Marine lines with careful, steady movements. When he appears at camp near sunrise, Marines rush forward in disbelief. Instead of 3 prisoners, he brings nearly 50. Some soldiers drop their rifles in shock. Others shake their heads, unable to comprehend how a single private has done what entire divisions rarely achieved. Even the officers who threatened him the day before cannot deny the impact. Word spreads through the battalion like wildfire. The kid who speaks Japanese is bringing them in alive. Some applaud him, others think he's insane. A few quietly admit they are grateful every civilian or soldier who surrenders is one less they must face in a cave with grenades and flamethrowers. But no one truly understands the danger Gabaldon is walking into. By early July, the battle reaches its most horrifying phase. Thousands of Japanese troops and civilians retreat to the island's northern cliffs. Propaganda has convinced many that Americans will torture them. Entire families prepare to leap into the sea rather than surrender. Gabaldon hears the first screams from those cliffs, crying children, desperate mothers, and he knows time is running out. He heads toward the cliffs again, following the echo of voices that rise from deep within the earth. The caves here are different, larger, more crowded, thick with smoke from underground fires. When he peers inside, he sees silhouettes pressed together, faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. He knows one mistake here could end in a massacre. Gabaldon ambushes 2 sentries standing guard near the entrance, catching them by surprise. He moves quickly, disarming them and whispering urgently in Japanese. He doesn't threaten them with death, he threatens them with the needless deaths of everyone inside. He convinces one to return to the cavern and repeat his message of surrender, using the authority of a soldier to reach those who trust him. Then Gabaldon walks toward the cave mouth, carrying a white cloth tied to a stick. The Marines behind him hold their breath, terrified someone will fire at the wrong moment. Gabaldon bows deeply, a gesture loaded with meaning, and begins speaking to the crowd inside about family, survival, and the weight of responsibility. He explains the truth slowly, with the voice of someone who knows their world. He describes how the Americans will treat prisoners. He tells them that suicide will bring dishonor, not honor. He speaks about his own family, the Japanese Americans imprisoned back home, and asks why innocent people should die for the lies of generals. His sword hangs at his side, his posture rigid. He demands to know how many American troops surround the canyon. Gabaldon answers calmly. He asks how women and children will be treated. Gabaldon answers again. Finally, the officer studies him for a long, silent moment, weighing life against duty. The officer turns toward the darkness and gives a single command. Suddenly, figures begin appearing, first slowly, then steadily. Rows of civilians walk out, followed by soldiers carrying the wounded. Mothers shield their children from the sunlight they haven't seen in days. The line grows longer and longer until even the Marines can barely believe what they're witnessing. What began as a trickle becomes a river of people. Dozens turn into hundreds. Gabaldon walks beside them, guiding them down the paths cut into the cliffside. Marines hurry to organize them, stunned by the scale of the surrender. Never in the Pacific War had so many people come out of hiding because of one man's voice. By the time they reach the American perimeter, Marines are whispering in disbelief. Some count over 800 prisoners in a single march, more than entire regiments captured in months of fighting. Others shake Gabaldon's hand, unable to find words for what he's done. The battalion commanders simply stare, speechless. Gabaldon knows the danger isn't over. For every group that surrenders, another hides deeper in the cliffs. Fanatical officers threaten to execute anyone who considers giving up. Civilians remain terrified of stepping into American hands, and the caves still echo each night with desperate whispers of suicide. But Gabaldon keeps going night after night, venturing alone into hostile territory. He enters ravines where even Marines with flamethrowers hesitate to go. He climbs narrow cliff paths, slick with mist. He speaks through cave mouths where a single bullet could drop him instantly. Each night is a gamble with death. And yet, he continues. Because every time another family walks out alive, every time another soldier chooses surrender over suicide, the war moves 1 inch closer to ending without another pointless death. Guy Gabaldon becomes known across the division as the Pied Piper of Saipan, the Marine who uses language instead of bullets and wins battles no one else could. By mid-July, Gabaldon has become a legend whispered across the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions. Officers debate whether he's a reckless fool or a once-in-a-generation asset. Enlisted men simply call him the kid who brings whole villages out of caves. But Guy himself knows the truth. The more people surrender, the more dangerous each night becomes. The remaining holdouts are not ordinary soldiers. They are the most determined, the most fanatical, the most willing to die rather than be captured. The Japanese High Command on Saipan issues new orders. Any soldier caught contemplating surrender is to be executed immediately. Officers are instructed to fire on civilians attempting to flee. These commands echo through the tunnels like a death sentence. Gabaldon hears the fear in their voices when he approaches the caves. Fear not of Americans, but of their own commanders. He realizes the next groups will be the hardest to reach. One evening, Gabaldon crawls along a ridge so narrow that even a misstep could send him plunging into the sea. The wind is sharp, cutting through his uniform. Below him, he sees a flicker of movement, a cluster of exhausted civilians huddled in a small side cave, away from the soldiers. A mother is rocking a tiny child who can barely cry anymore. It is that fragile human sound that pushes him forward. He positions himself near the entrance, far enough to avoid being shot immediately, but close enough for them to hear his voice clearly. When he speaks, he doesn't shout orders or threats. He speaks gently, like someone comforting a family late at night. He tells them the fighting is nearly over, that the Marines will not harm their children, that there is no honor in dying for officers who abandon them. A young Japanese soldier appears first, barefoot, trembling, holding a rifle like it weighs 100 pounds. He's barely older than Gabaldon himself. Behind him, others follow, women carrying bundles, old men leaning on pieces of driftwood, children blinking toward the moonlight. Gabaldon steps aside and guides them quietly up the ridge, checking behind constantly for pursuing soldiers. The escape does not go unnoticed. From deep inside the cavern, officers shout in fury. A shot rings out, whistling past Gabaldon's shoulder. The group freezes. He motions sharply for them to keep moving. In that moment, he realizes how thin the line is between success and disaster. One stray bullet could turn a peaceful surrender into a slaughter. But they make it to Marine lines without losses. Later that night, Gabaldon returns to the main cliffs. The smell of gunpowder and damp stone fills the air. The last significant holdouts, a mix of die-hard soldiers and terrified civilians, are believed to be hiding here. Gabaldon knows these are the ones who might rather blow themselves up than speak with him. He tightens the strap on his helmet and moves forward anyway. He hears chanting inside one of the deeper caves. Low, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. He recognizes the ritual of soldiers preparing themselves for death. Grenades are being passed out, swords unsheathed. In his mind, he sees the faces of the people who trusted him days earlier. He steps closer, heart pounding, and begins speaking before the first grenade pin can be pulled. His voice echoes through the cavern, stronger this time. Not gentle, but commanding. He speaks like an officer inspecting troops. He belittles the lie that Americans will torture captives. He appeals to their pride as soldiers. True warriors protect their people, not throw their lives away. His words are sharp, like a blade cutting through panic. There is tense silence. Then, unexpectedly, a Japanese NCO shouts back, not in defiance, but in exhaustion. His men are starving. Their officers have fled. They do not want to die, but they fear being shamed. Gabaldon seizes the moment. He tells them surrender is not shame. Living to return home is the bravest thing you can do. His voice steadies as he takes a step into the cave. One by one, dim lanterns begin to rise in the darkness as soldiers stand up. Two men help a wounded comrade to his feet. A young private ties a makeshift sling around a civilian boy's arm. The group slowly forms a line. When they step outside, the moonlight reveals their gaunt faces, men who have been living underground for nearly a month. Gabaldon leads them carefully along the cliffside. American scouts watching from a distance are stunned to see almost 40 silhouettes moving behind a single Marine. When the group reaches the perimeter, a lieutenant simply removes his helmet and whispers, "This kid is performing miracles." The next morning, Gabaldon is summoned to battalion headquarters. He walks into a tent filled with officers, their faces a mix of admiration, frustration, and concern. One colonel leans over a map and taps the northern cliffs with a pencil. "You're doing what none of our doctrine accounted for," he says. "We can't decide if we should promote you or tie you to a tree so you stop sneaking off." Gabaldon doesn't smile. He explains that there are still dozens, maybe hundreds, trapped in the northern caves. If the Marines assault those positions, the casualties will be catastrophic on both sides. He asks for permission to try one more approach. The officers exchange glances. Officially, they cannot order him to go. Unofficially, they tell him, "If you disappear again, nobody saw anything." That night, Gabaldon prepares differently. He brings more food, more water, even small comfort items to hand out to civilians. He tucks extra bandages into his pockets and ties a white cloth to his belt. He is no longer just an interpreter. He is a negotiator, a rescuer, a one-man humanitarian mission walking into the heart of enemy territory. As he approaches the cliffs again, he sees the glow of a fire deep inside a cave and hears quiet singing families trying to console one another. The moment is so human, so painfully familiar, that it nearly breaks him. He thinks of the Nakano family behind barbed wire, of their laughter around the dinner table, of how different their lives would be if they had been born on Saipan instead of Los Angeles. He steps into the cave's entrance and calls out softly. The singing stops. Shadows shift. Soldiers raise rifles but hesitate, recognizing his voice from the last nights. Gabaldon speaks about the end of the battle, about the evacuation of civilians, about a chance to live. He talks to them not as enemies, but as people who deserve a future. A middle-aged woman steps forward first, clutching a child to her chest. She whispers to the soldiers behind her, urging them to listen. Soon, other civilians move toward the front. Grandparents, teenagers, families who have suffered too long underground. Gabaldon motions for them to follow him one at a time, moving slowly up the narrow path toward the ridge. A handful of Japanese soldiers stand back, torn between doctrine and humanity. One officer finally lowers his rifle and nods stiffly. The others follow. They join the line, walking behind the civilians. Another large group has chosen life over death. When Gabaldon looks back, he sees eyes filled not with hatred, but with relief. As dawn breaks, he leads nearly 70 more people out of the caves. The sunrise paints the sky gold and crimson as they approach Marine lines. A chaplain watching the procession murmurs, "This boy has saved more lives than any man with a rifle on this island." But Gabaldon is already looking back toward the cliffs, knowing his work still isn't finished. As Gabaldon escorts the group into Marine lines, he notices how the soldiers look at him differently now, not with suspicion or irritation, but with something close to awe. Some Marines give him quiet nods. Others simply stare, trying to understand how an 18-year-old private has accomplished what entire battalions failed to do. But Guy doesn't linger. He drops off the civilians, replenishes his water, and heads back toward the cliffs before the sun is fully risen. Fatigue gnaws at him. His uniform is soaked with sweat and cave dust. His boots are cut open from jagged coral rock. He hasn't slept more than an hour in 2 days, but he knows the caves still hold many who will die if he stops now. He moves through the jungle with the restless urgency of someone who understands that every moment he hesitates, another family buries its hope. By midday, the battlefield changes tone entirely. American artillery and tanks push deeper into the island's interior, forcing remaining holdouts toward the far northern ridges. Smoke rises in pillars that stretch toward the sky. Gabaldon pauses only long enough to watch a firebombed grove collapse into ash. He knows the surviving civilians are fleeing toward the last cave systems and that he must reach them before the fighting does. Night falls again, bringing a heavy silence. Gabaldon reaches a section of cliff where the ground drops sharply into the sea. Waves smash against the rocks below, spraying mist into the air. This is where many Japanese had chosen suicide in the last 48 hours. He sees discarded shoes, torn clothing, and broken lanterns near the edge. He swallows hard and keeps moving. The suffering here is beyond anything he ever imagined. Deeper along the cliff path, he hears murmured prayers drifting from inside a narrow cave. These are not soldiers praying for strength. They sound like families preparing for their final moments. Gabaldon steps into view, removes his helmet to show respect, and calls out softly. His voice trembles slightly. He tells them he has brought out hundreds of their people already. He promises again that no harm will come to them. A man steps forward cautiously, holding a bamboo stick as if it were a weapon. Behind him, the glow of a dim candle reveals a cluster of women gripping their children. A grandmother clutches prayer beads between shaking hands. Gabaldon speaks about the shame of unnecessary death. He tells them that their families deserve to live, that dying here would bring no honor, only grief. His words begin to soften their fear. Suddenly, 2 Japanese soldiers appear from a side tunnel, rifles raised. They shout warnings and order the civilians back inside. Gabaldon raises his hands slowly, his voice unwavering. He explains that the Americans are not here to massacre them, that surrender is their only chance to survive. The soldiers hesitate, unsure whether to follow doctrine or protect the civilians they are supposed to defend. One soldier lowers his rifle first. His voice cracks as he admits they are out of food. The other soldier steps forward too, eyes hollow. He asks a single question. If we surrender, will we be allowed to live? Gabaldon nods once, firmly. That quiet reassurance breaks the tension, and the civilians begin to gather around him, clutching what few belongings they have left. As Gabaldon leads them toward Marine lines, he senses movement behind them. A small group of armed Japanese stragglers is watching silently from a distance. He grips his carbine but keeps walking. He knows that if he fires, the civilians will panic. If he stops, they may be overtaken. He maintains a steady pace, shielding the group with his presence until they reach friendly lines. Back at the perimeter, a corpsman rushes forward to help the wounded civilians. A Marine lieutenant asks Gabaldon how many more are still hiding. Guy takes a long breath and says quietly, "Too many." He looks exhausted but resolute. The lieutenant shakes his head, unable to believe the scale of what this one Marine is doing. But Gabaldon is already turning back toward the cliffs. At dusk, Gabaldon moves along a twisting trail that leads into a cavern known among the Marines as the Dragon's Throat. Rumor has it that dozens of soldiers remain inside, guarding officers who refuse to surrender. The air is suffocating thick with the smell of sweat, smoke, and seawater. Gabaldon steadies himself. This cave may hold the most dangerous confrontation yet. Inside, he finds a steep descent, lit by scattered candles. He hears arguing officers berating enlisted men, civilians pleading for mercy. The situation is on the verge of collapse. If he misjudges even one sentence, panic will erupt. He steps forward into the dim corridor, letting his voice echo down the rocky walls like a calm, steady anchor in the chaos. This time, Gabaldon changes tactics. Instead of intimidation, he uses empathy. He speaks of the pain he's witnessed on both sides, the families who surrendered peacefully, the soldiers who chose life and now wait safely under Marine protection. He even tells them about the Nakano family, Japanese Americans who raised him, now suffering behind American fences. His voice carries true heartbreak. Those words strike deeper than commands or threats. A soldier near the front lowers his weapon slowly. Another begins crying silently. The officers shout at them to stand firm, but their authority is slipping. The realities of war, the hunger, exhaustion, and hopelessness are stronger than the propaganda drilled into them. A young civilian girl steps forward, holding her younger brother's hand. She timidly asks if they will be allowed to drink clean water if they surrender. Gabaldon kneels to meet her height and promises her more than water. He promises safety. The entire cave seems to waver. For many, this is the first moment in weeks that hope feels real. Finally, one officer, the oldest, steps into the candlelight. His face is haggard, marked by sleepless nights and impossible decisions. He speaks slowly, asking whether his men will be treated with dignity. Gabaldon answers him truthfully and respectfully. The officer lowers his sword. In that simple motion, the cavern's resistance collapses. Soldiers begin clearing paths for civilians. Mothers bundle their children. The wounded are lifted onto makeshift stretchers. Lanterns flicker as they approach the cave mouth, revealing men and women who haven't seen daylight in weeks. The procession forms in near silence, each step measured and fragile. When the first figures emerge into the night, the Marines on the ridge freeze. They watch, stunned, as the line seems to grow endlessly. 20, 30, then 40 people, with more shadows moving inside. Gabaldon signals to the Marines to hold fire and to light the path with lanterns. The surrender is happening calmly, impossibly, beautifully. By the time the last soldier emerges, nearly 50 more lives have been saved. Gabaldon escorts them personally, walking beside the elderly and checking on the wounded. The Marines gather around, murmuring to each other. One sergeant whispers, "If this kid had a whole unit of men who spoke Japanese, this war would have ended weeks ago." But the victory is bittersweet. Gabaldon stands on the ridge, looking back at the endless black mouth of the cave. He knows he cannot save everyone. Yet he also knows something else. Every group that surrenders is one more blow to the belief that dying is the only honorable choice. As the night wind sweeps across the cliffs, he sets his jaw and prepares to go back in once more. The sun rises slowly over the Saipan coastline as Gabaldon prepares for what might be his final venture into the caves. His body aches from exhaustion, bruises forming under his uniform, but his eyes remain sharp. He knows the Japanese lines are collapsing, and with every hour that passes, the last remaining pockets of resistance become more desperate. This is the moment where the wrong word or even the right word spoken too late can mean the difference between surrender and mass suicide. Gabaldon takes a deep breath and heads toward the darkest part of the cliffs. As he approaches a narrow ravine, he hears frantic voices echoing upward, men shouting, women crying, babies screaming in fear. The sound is different this time. Not the ritual calm of soldiers preparing for death, but the chaotic panic of people caught between two collapsing worlds. Gabaldon climbs the rocks and peers over the edge. Inside a hidden pit beneath the cliff shelf, more than 30 civilians huddle together while a handful of soldiers stand above them, torn between defending them and ordering them to die with honor. The tension is bursting at the seams. Gabaldon slowly descends the rocks, stepping carefully so his silhouette doesn't trigger panic. He calls out in Japanese, his voice firm but filled with urgency. He tells them the battle is effectively over, that their officers have surrendered across the island, that continuing to hide will only bring tragedy. One soldier points his rifle at him, shaking violently. Gabaldon doesn't stop talking. He explains how many lives he has already saved, how none of the people who surrendered were harmed, and how Americans are already feeding the youngest and treating the wounded. The soldier's rifle wavers. A mother steps forward first, clutching her child whose face is streaked with tears and dust. She looks up at the soldier blocking the exit and quietly says she wants her son to live. Another civilian agrees, then another. The soldiers look overwhelmed as the crowd shifts emotionally around them. One finally drops his rifle to his knees. The others follow, their shoulders sagging with exhaustion and surrender. And just like that, the last barrier falls. The civilians begin climbing out of the pit toward Gabaldon, whispering gratitude through trembling voices. Gabaldon leads them up the ravine trail, steadying the elderly and helping children over jagged rock. When they reach the ridge, Marines waiting nearby widen their eyes. Another group rescued, another miracle pulled from the jaws of despair. As the civilians walk toward safety, Gabaldon remains behind for a moment, looking back at the caves one last time. For days, he fought without firing a shot. For days, he turned voices of fear into voices of hope. And now, as the island finally falls silent, he realizes that his war was never about killing. It was about saving every life he could reach. Don't forget to hit subscribe to discover more untold stories of World War II.